The Gryffindor common room had finally emptied. Not completely, of course. Hogwarts never truly went silent. But the loud, bright bustle of evening had thinned to a soft hush, as if the castle itself had exhaled and decided the day was finished. Harry Potter sat in his usual armchair by the fire. At least, he thought it was his usual chair. Or maybe it had become his chair so gradually that he hadn't noticed the moment it began to feel like it belonged to him. He tried to pinpoint when the armchair had turned from a chair by the hearth into something steadier, something familiar enough to settle into without thinking. Third year, maybe. Or perhaps the chair had chosen him first. Claimed him in the quiet way Hogwarts did sometimes, offering a small certainty without announcing it. The worn velvet beneath his fingertips was smooth in places, flattened by decades of students who had sat here before him. It held warmth that wasn't just from the fire. It was the warmth of use, of laughter, of late-night conversations and whispered secrets and half-finished homework and triumphs that never made it into books. Tonight, that warmth felt strangely personal, like a welcome meant only for him. The fire crackled steadily, the sound soft and rhythmic, sending sparks spiraling upward in lazy golden loops. September had arrived gently this year, not with fierce storms or sharp cold, but with cool evenings that turned the hearth into comfort rather than necessity. The castle still held summer's memory in its stone, but the air had begun to change in small ways. The faintest edge of chill, the subtle shift of scent, as the grounds leaned toward autumn. Outside the tall tower windows, the last daylight had faded into a deep velvety blue. Beyond the glass, the sky darkened above the forbidden forest, and the first stars began to appear. Pinpricks of silver scattered across the vastness, like someone had shaken a handful of glitter over a dark cloth. Harry stretched his legs toward the heat and let out a long breath. Only then did he realize he'd been holding it. The first weeks of term always brought a particular exhaustion. Not unpleasant, but thorough, the kind that reached into your muscles and made you feel pleasantly heavy. There were new schedules to memorize, professors to settle back into, routines to rebuild. Even the castle itself had its rhythm, and returning to it after summer felt like stepping back into a familiar dance. But this year felt lighter. Harry couldn't decide if it was because he knew Hogwarts so well now that it no longer unsettled him, or because there was something steadier inside him, some new quiet certainty he hadn't had in earlier years. Perhaps it was simply that Hogwarts, after all this time, no longer felt like a place he visited. It felt like a place he returned to. The portrait hole swung open with a soft creak. Ron Weasley climbed through first, red hair messy as usual, looking like someone who had survived a full day on stubbornness alone. Hermione Granger followed close behind him, her hair slightly more unruly than her usual standards would allow. Both of them carried the unmistakable signs of a long day: tired eyes, loosened posture, and that immediate relief people got when they stepped into a place where they didn't have to perform. Ron dropped into the chair beside Harry with the graceless ease of someone who had never worried about looking dignified. "Knew you'd be here," Ron said, voice thick with fatigue but warm all the same. Harry turned his head, smiling. Couldn't resist the fire. Ron jerked his chin toward the staircase. Seamus and Dean are having some sort of debate about Quidditch tactics upstairs. Couldn't hear myself think. It's like they're determined to argue until Christmas. Hermione settled onto the sofa opposite, tucking her feet beneath her and reaching for the thick woolen blanket draped over the cushions. She pulled it around her shoulders with a soft sigh. "I don't know how they have the energy," she said, and while the words sounded like criticism, her tone held fondness. "We've had lessons all day, homework piling up already, and they're ready to talk for hours." "That's just Seamus," Ron replied, grinning. "He'd argue about the shape of a spoon if you gave him half a chance." Hermione's eyes flicked up. you would too. Ron opened his mouth, then closed it again, as if realizing he had no defense. Harry chuckled softly, and the sound felt strange and good in the quiet room. Ron leaned back, stretching his long legs out toward the fire. Remember second year when I tried to convince everyone the Cannons were going to win the league? Hermione made a small noise of disbelief. You didn't try. You insisted. And I maintain it was a perfectly reasonable belief at the time, Ron said solemnly. You maintain it now, Hermione corrected. Harry let the familiar bickering wash over him like warmth. This was the part of Hogwarts that mattered most. Not the spells or the staircases or the feasts, though he loved those too, but this easy, steady companionship. The way the world felt softer when Ron and Hermione were close by. The way he didn't have to be Harry Potter here. He could just be Harry. The fire shifted with a quiet pop, a log settling deeper into the grate. Sparks drifted upward in a bright spray before fading into the chimney. The light flickered across the stone walls, touching old tapestries and catching on the gilt edges of portrait frames. Shadows moved in gentle patterns, like slow dancing. Somewhere high up in one corner of the room, one of the portraits let out a deep, contented snore. Ron rummaged in his robes and produced a slightly squashed parcel wrapped in brown paper. He set it on the low table with a look of satisfaction. Right, he said, rubbing his hands. If we're stuck doing homework, we might as well do it properly. Hermione narrowed her eyes immediately, as if she could sense trouble forming. Ron began to unwrap the paper, grin widening. I brought provisions. Hermione's voice sharpened. Ronald Weasley, you cannot possibly think. Relax, Ron said quickly, hands still moving. I'm not asking you to write anything for me. I'm just preparing. The paper came away, revealing a whole treacle tart. Harry blinked. Your mum sent you a whole tart? Ron went a little pink. Well, yeah. Hermione's mouth twitched. She spoils you. She spoils all of us, Ron said, sounding delighted by this logic. He lifted his wand and, with the casual skill of someone who had grown up cutting food with magic, divided the tart into 3 generous pieces. He slid one toward Hermione, one toward Harry, and kept one for himself. See, Ron said, as if proving a grand point. Everyone benefits. Harry accepted his portion. The scent rose immediately. Golden treacle, buttery pastry, warm sweetness mixing with smoke from the fire. It smelled like comfort, like warmth, like safety, like the burrow. And it hit Harry in a way he hadn't expected. Not like a sharp pain, but like a deep ache, gentle and heavy in his chest, because the burrow smelled like all the things Privet Drive had never been. Harry took a bite and closed his eyes for a moment. The taste was rich and soft and perfect. This is brilliant, he said quietly. When he opened his eyes, Hermione was watching him, not staring, not intruding, but noticing in that way she always did. Hermione had a remarkable talent for hearing what people didn't say, for reading the spaces between words. Ron, oblivious as ever, was halfway through his slice already. Mum starts baking the second there's even a hint of chill in the air, he said through a mouthful. Says it's wasteful to heat the kitchen with magic when the oven does the job and gives you treacle tart at the end. Hermione made a small, thoughtful sound. That's actually quite practical. Ron swallowed. Don't start, I'm not starting, Hermione said primly. I'm just saying most wizarding families rely so heavily on spells that they forget there's efficiency in doing things the traditional way. Ron groaned. Is this going to turn into one of your lectures? It could, Hermione said, and though she sounded stern, there was amusement in her eyes. Harry smiled again, quieter this time. The three of them sat for a moment, the fire popping softly, the room warm and half-lit and peaceful. The tart disappeared in slow bites, the sweetness stretching the quiet. Hermione set her slice down carefully and picked up her quill and parchment, her posture shifting into that focused readiness she always had when she was about to say something interesting. I was thinking, she said slowly. Ron slumped. Uh-oh. Hermione ignored him. She gestured lightly toward the room with her quill. Have you ever noticed how the fires here never quite go out? Harry glanced at the hearth. You mean in the common room? Everywhere, Hermione said. The common rooms, the great hall, even some of the classrooms. They burn less in summer, but they never go cold. There's always at least an ember. Ron shrugged. House cells, aren't they? Keeping everything running? Partly, Hermione agreed. But I was reading about Hogwarts' foundational enchantments in the library. Ron stared at her. You were reading about foundational enchantments before term even started? Hermione's eyes snapped to him. Ron, don't look at me like that. Harry hid a grin behind his mug. Hermione continued, voice lower, more thoughtful. There's a charm woven into the stones themselves. The castle remembers warmth. Ron blinked. That's not a sentence I expected to hear today. It remembers every fire that's ever been lit here, Hermione said, and her voice carried genuine wonder now. Every moment of comfort, every bit of heat shared in these rooms. It feeds the enchantment. That's why Hogwarts never feels truly cold, even in winter. Harry stared into the flames. The idea settled into him slowly, like something ancient and true. So this fire, he said quietly, has been burning for 1,000 years. In one form or another, Hermione confirmed. The logs are replaced, obviously, but the warmth is continuous. The castle won't allow complete cold. It won't allow complete dark. They fell into silence again. Harry's mind drifted through time, imagining students in old-fashioned robes, sitting in the same chair, leaning the same way toward the same fire, needing the same comfort. Gryffindors through centuries. People laughing, people crying, people homesick, people tired, people afraid, people in love. All of them, warmed by the same enduring ember. The thought didn't make Harry feel small. It made him feel connected, like he belonged to something bigger than his own worries, older than his own story, and yet still somehow meant for him. Ron broke the silence first, voice quieter now. That's kind of brilliant. Hermione nodded. Isn't it? Ron scratched the back of his neck. I mean, I've always just taken it for granted. Fires, there. You sit, you warm up. You don't really think about it being the same warmth the founders knew. Harry's gaze stayed on the hearth. It makes you think about home, he said softly, in a different way. Hermione's expression softened, and for a moment she looked older than she was, not in years, but in understanding. Yes, she said, it does. Ron cleared his throat, as if the emotion had crept too close for his liking. He reached for his bag with exaggerated determination. Right, he declared. This is all very touching, but Snape is still going to murder me if I don't do this essay. Hermione lifted an eyebrow. The one you haven't started? Ron shot her a wounded look. That's the one. Harry chuckled and pulled his own parchment closer. settling deeper into his chair. Hermione opened her notes, already organized and color-coded, of course. Ron groaned dramatically and uncapped his ink as if it weighed 100 pounds. The common room around them had shifted into that late evening quality. Not silent, not asleep, but settled. The air itself felt calm. The castle seemed to breathe in its walls, steady and ancient and protective. They worked in a comfortable hush. Quills scratched parchment. Ron muttered under his breath. Hermione made occasional soft sounds of satisfaction when she found something useful. The fire burned, and as the fire burned, Harry's attention drifted. Not because he couldn't focus, he could, mostly, but because the room felt like it held more than just warmth. It held history. It held something gentle and watchful. That was when he noticed the portrait. It hung just to the left of the hearth, small, easy to overlook among larger frames, quieter than the grand dramatic paintings people usually noticed. It showed a landscape, rolling hills, a few trees, and in the distance, a cottage with thin smoke rising from its chimney. Harry had passed it hundreds, maybe thousands, of times without paying attention. But tonight, something was different. The hills, he was sure, had been green the last time he'd looked. Summer green, lush and bright. Now they were touched with gold. The trees were edged with the first hint of autumn color. Even the light in the painting looked lower and warmer, as if it had shifted to match September's late afternoons rather than summer's long midday brightness. It was subtle, but Harry was certain. Hermione, he said slowly. Her quill paused. What? He nodded toward the frame. That landscape portrait by the fire, has it always shown autumn? Hermione followed his gaze. Which one? She frowned slightly, eyes narrowing with focus. I don't know. I've never really watched it. Ron squinted from his chair. Maybe it changes with the seasons. Some portraits do that. That fruit bowl in the entrance hall changes, Hermione said, already sounding like she'd found a puzzle. But that one changes because students interact with it. This portrait, no one ever touches it. I don't even think I've seen it move. As if responding to her words, a tiny bird flew across the painted sky. It vanished behind a tree in a single flutter of color. Ron blinked. Well, it's moving now. Harry stood drawn toward it, and the chair's warmth seemed to cling to him as he moved away. He approached the portrait, studying it closely. The frame was old, the gilding was worn smooth in places. There was no plaque at the bottom, no artist's name, no subject title. Just the quiet countryside scene, almost ordinary. Almost, but not quite. Because it had changed, and not just in a vague seasonal way. It looked like now, like the exact kind of September twilight falling outside their tower windows. You think it means something? Harry asked. Hermione joined him, eyes bright with that hungry curiosity she had when the world offered her a new mystery. Everything at Hogwarts means something, she said softly. Or at least, everything has a reason. The castle doesn't do random magic. Ron called from behind them, lazy and amused. Or maybe the castle just gets bored and likes showing off. Hermione ignored him. Harry stared at the little cottage and the painting. Smoke curled from its chimney. The windows were dark for now. The path to its door was empty, and yet it gave him a strange feeling, like standing outside a house you recognized, even if you'd never been inside. A sense of welcome. Hermione spoke again. We should watch it properly. Make a note of when it changes. See if there's a pattern. Ron groaned. Oh, of course. You want to make it homework? Research, Hermione corrected. Extra homework you invented, Ron said. Harry smiled, but he didn't disagree with Hermione. He couldn't shake the feeling that this mattered, not because it was dangerous or dramatic, but because it felt deliberate, like the castle had turned its face slightly toward them and offered something quiet. They returned to their places, though Harry's eyes kept drifting to the portrait like a magnet pulling. The fire settled lower. Ron yawned huge and unashamed. Hugh, I am never finishing this essay tonight, Ron announced. You've barely started, Hermione said sharply. Exactly, Ron replied, as if that proved his point perfectly. Harry looked down at his parchment. He'd written a few paragraphs, but his mind wasn't fully in it. Homework suddenly felt less urgent than the warmth of the room, the presence of his friends, and the small mystery hanging beside the hearth. We could do it tomorrow, Harry suggested. It's not due until Friday. Hermione looked scandalized. That's what you said last year about Transfiguration. And you ended up writing until midnight the night before. And we got acceptable marks, Ron said with a shrug. Hermione's mouth opened, then closed. She shook her head as if trying not to laugh. You are both impossible. But you like us, Ron said cheerfully. Against my better judgment, Hermione replied, but her eyes were fond. Harry watched them with quiet contentment. He glanced at the portrait again, and this time he noticed something new. The smoke from the cottage chimney had thickened slightly, as though someone inside had added fresh wood to the fire. And then one window lit up, a small, worn golden square in the painted dark. A moment later, another window glowed, tiny and distant, but unmistakably warm. Someone was home. Harry's chest tightened, not with sadness this time, but with something softer, a kind of gratitude, a kind of longing that didn't hurt. It simply existed, gentle as the firelight. Look, Harry said quietly, voice almost lost beneath the crackle of the hearth. Ron and Hermione followed his gaze. They sat together, all three of them, watching those little windows brighten in the portrait as the real fire before them burned and breathed. It's beautiful, Hermione whispered, and it was. Not the loud, glittering beauty of spells meant to impress. Not the grand beauty of dragons, or duels, or enchanted feasts. Just a quiet, steady loveliness, the kind that reminded you the world held safe places. The kind that made you remember rest was possible. That warmth existed. That light could appear in dark windows and mean you belong somewhere. Ron stood and stretched, cracking his back with a sigh. Right, Snape can wait. I'm going to bed. Hermione gathered her books, already organizing tomorrow in her head. Harry lingered a moment longer, eyes caught on the painting. Tomorrow, he thought, he'd pay closer attention. Tomorrow, he'd watch for more changes. Tomorrow, he'd try to understand what Hogwarts was showing them. But tonight he didn't need answers. Tonight it was enough to sit in the warmth, with his friends close, while the castle held them safe in its ancient stones. Yeah, Harry said finally, voice soft. Bed sounds good. They climbed the staircase together, their footsteps quiet on stone worn smooth by countless students before them. The tower felt calm, wrapped in late evening peace. At the entrance to the girls' stairs, Hermione paused. Harry, she said, voice gentle. He looked at her. That thing you said about home, Hermione continued. You're right. It does feel different this year. Ron nodded too, almost awkward about it, and Harry realized he didn't need to explain. They understood. The three of them always did. Harry slipped into his dormitory and changed quickly, the quiet of the room soothing after the day's noise. When he crawled into bed, the blankets felt heavier than they had in summer, not unpleasant, but comforting, as if the bed itself had learned how to hold warmth. Through the window, stars scattered across the September sky like silver dust. The castle was settling, stones cooling, corridors emptying, fires burning low but never dark, Hogwarts breathing, quietly keeping watch. Harry thought of the portrait's cottage, its steady glowing windows. He thought of warmth remembered by stone. He thought of belonging. And before sleep took him, a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He was exactly where he needed to be. The library after dinner had a particular kind of quiet, not the stiff silence of rules, but the soft hush of people choosing concentration together. Harry had come to love it over the years. It felt like stepping into a different temperature of the world. The corridors outside might buzz with students hurrying to clubs or common rooms, portraits calling after them, footsteps echoing on stone. But inside the library, sound became careful. Quills scratched gently. Pages turned like a whisper. Even breathing seemed slower, as if the air itself encouraged calm. Madame Pince patrolled the aisles with the devotion of a guardian creature, her sharp gaze ready to pounce on the smallest offense. A bent page corner, a cracked spine, a smudge of ink too close to the margin. Yet even her strict presence had become part of the library's rhythm. She wasn't unkind, Harry thought. She was simply fiercely protective of the place she loved. October had taken hold of Hogwarts with dramatic enthusiasm. The grounds were a blaze of rust and gold, leaves piled in corners as if the wind had decided to decorate. Pumpkins appeared everywhere, on windowsills, tucked into corridor niches, perched cheerfully beside suits of armor that looked mildly offended by the seasonal clutter. The house elves embraced it completely. Pumpkin juice at breakfast, pumpkin pasties at lunch, rich soups at dinner, and warm breads that smelled like autumn itself. But it was the evenings Harry loved most. The sun set early now, painting the sky in amber and rose. The castle's torches flared brighter when the wind rose, as if Hogwarts disliked the idea of darkness arriving unannounced. Outside, leaves slapped gently against windows in soft percussion. Inside, the library became a refuge. Warm, steady, safe. Tonight, Harry sat at a long study table near the restricted section, a place he could only access because Professor McGonagall had given them written permission for their defense against the dark arts research. The note felt official enough to calm even Madame Pince's suspicions, though she'd still sniffed at them when they entered, as if determined to find an excuse to throw them out anyway. Ron sprawled across from Harry, in a posture that suggested effort was something that happened to other people. His transfiguration notes lay open, but the margins were filled with doodles, broomsticks, goal hoops, and what might have been an attempt at drawing a dragon that looked more like an angry sausage. Hermione sat between them, surrounded by her usual fortress of books. It wasn't just one stack either. It was a carefully arranged system, piles at specific heights, open volumes held in place with quills and spare parchment. Everything organized the way she organized her mind, purposeful, precise, unstoppable. I still don't understand why we need to know the difference between a Grindylow and a Kappa, Ron muttered, not for the first time. They're both water creatures. They're both horrible, They both try to drown you. What's the difference? The difference, Hermione said without looking up, is habitat, behavior, and which defensive spells are most effective. Honestly, Ron, did you even listen in the lecture? I was there, Ron said defensively, physically present. Hermione's quill paused. That is not the same thing. My mind, Ron admitted, may have wandered a bit during the part about webbed fingers versus scales. Harry smiled, but only half heard them. His own essay lay in front of him, already longer than required. Lupin's assignment, a comparison of defensive spells against different creatures, should have felt like work, but it had caught Harry's interest in a way that surprised him. Maybe because it felt practical, real. Maybe because Lupin taught as if he cared about students' understanding, not just memorizing. Outside the tall windows, twilight deepened. Harry could see his reflection faintly in the glass, pale, ghostly, layered over the darkening grounds beyond. The forbidden forest sat like a shadow at the edge of the world, and as he watched, the first stars pricked through the deepening blue. A sudden rustle of feathers made him look up. Hedwig swept through one of the high windows left open for owl post and landed neatly on the table edge, startling Ron so badly he nearly knocked over an ink bottle. Blimey, Ron hissed, grabbing for the bottle. Hedwig ignored him entirely, as she always did, and dropped a small brown paper parcel onto Harry's parchment with crisp authority. Then she hooted once. A sound that felt both affectionate and expectant, and launched herself back into the air, disappearing into the shadows above. Ron leaned forward, eyes bright with immediate hope. Is it food? Harry laughed softly and unwrapped the parcel. Inside was a bar of Honeydukes chocolate, the kind wrapped in expensive paper, the kind that smelled rich even before you opened it. Tucked beneath it was a folded note. Harry opened the note carefully. The handwriting wasn't familiar. It was elegant without being showy, the letters clean and flowing, like someone who wrote often and took quiet pride in doing it well, for the student who helped a first year find her way to charms class yesterday. Small kindnesses matter. There was no signature. No name. No house. Just those words. Harry stared at the note, a small shiver of surprise running through him. That's odd, Hermione said, leaning over to look. Her eyes narrowed in interest, the way they always did when the world offered her something unexplained. Who sent it? No idea, Harry said slowly. I did help her. She was completely turned around on the third floor. But I didn't think anyone noticed. Someone always notices at Hogwarts, Hermione said, thoughtful. The portraits, the ghosts, other students. In a castle this old, nothing really happens unnoticed. Ron reached for the chocolate, with the hopeful boldness of someone who believed snacks were a communal right. Well, anonymous admirer or secret benefactor, are you going to eat it? Because if not, Carr? Harry broke the bar into 3 pieces, sliding one to Ron and one to Hermione. It's better shared. Ron looked personally blessed. Hermione accepted her piece with a softer expression than she meant to show. Harry watched her, noticing how quickly her mind moved, already cataloguing this as something that mattered. The chocolate was perfect. Smooth, rich, warm on the tongue. For a moment, the library felt even safer, as if sweetness itself was part of the enchantment. You know, Hermione said after a pause, this isn't the first time I've heard about something like this lately. Ron blinked. People sending you chocolate? Hermione gave him a look. No anonymous kindnesses. She counted on her fingers lightly, thinking. Neville mentioned finding a bookmark in his herbology book with notes about gillyweed. Lavender said someone left her a spare quill when hers broke in potions. Small things. Helpful things. Quiet things. Ron's eyebrows climbed. So, we've got a secret do-gooder running around Hogwarts. Like a positive version of Peeves, Harry said, amused. Ron grinned. Imagine. Peeves would probably explode. Hermione didn't smile fully, but her eyes were bright. It's interesting. Harry folded the note and slid it into his bag carefully, as if it might vanish if he didn't treat it with respect. It had made him feel seen. Not because he wanted attention. He'd had too much of the wrong kind, but because it reminded him that small choices mattered, that even when you did something quietly, without expecting reward, the world sometimes returned kindness anyway. He turned back to his essay, but his focus had shifted. The library felt deeper tonight, as if it held secrets just beneath the surface. Even the shadows between shelves seemed richer, layered with history. A sound drifted from somewhere near the restricted section. A soft thud, like a book falling or a stack shifting. Harry looked up. Ron looked up too, squinting. What was that? Hermione paused, listening. The library makes sounds all the time. Books reshelve themselves. Pages turn. Cataloguing charms adjust things. Madame Pince says it's perfectly normal. Right, Harry said slowly, but his attention stayed fixed on the shadowed aisle. The sound had felt pointed somehow, like it wanted to be noticed. Minutes stretched. Other students came and went. A pair of Ravenclaws deep in argument about arithmancy, a Hufflepuff who looked close to tears over ancient runes, a tall Slytherin who glided past without acknowledging them at all. Madame Pince prowled with the patience of a predator. Every so often she swooped down on a student and hissed a warning about proper handling. Her glare could curdle ink. Harry finished a paragraph, then another. Ron did absolutely nothing productive, though he occasionally stared at his parchment, as if hoping words would appear out of pity. Hermione remained a machine of focus. Eventually, Harry reached that point where sitting still too long made his legs feel like they belonged to someone else. He set his quill down and stretched. I'm going to walk a bit, he said quietly. Just look for something useful. Hermione nodded without looking up. Ron mumbled something that might have been bring snacks. Harry slipped away from the table and wandered toward the restricted section, staying safely within the boundaries of McGonagall's permission. The shelves here felt older. The air was thicker with the scent of leather and parchment and dust that had settled over centuries. Some books whispered as he passed, murmuring in languages he didn't know. Others felt heavy with presence, as if they remembered hands that had touched them long before Harry was born. That was when he saw it. A bookmark, a simple strip of parchment sticking out of a thick volume, as if it had been placed there on purpose. Harry paused. Something in him tightened, the way it did when a puzzle piece clicked faintly into place. He pulled the book from the shelf carefully. The title read, Magical Bonds, A History of Friendship and Loyalty in Wizarding Society. Harry frowned slightly. It didn't look like the sort of book students borrowed casually. It looked chosen. He opened it to the page marked. The bookmark itself was plain, but on it were neat, faded initials, *EM, *and, beneath the initials, written in the same elegant hand as the chocolate note. True friendship requires no magic, but magic can honor it. Harry stared at the words, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. The passage on the page was about Hogwarts founders, about the friendship that had once held them together before it fractured. It spoke of loyalty being built from daily choices, from quiet acts of trust, from patience and forgiveness. It spoke of bonds that endured not because they were easy, but because people chose them again and again. Harry stood there, the book heavy in his hands, and suddenly the library's hush felt like it was holding its breath with him. Someone had left this. Left it to be found. Left it for someone who might need it. Harry? Hermione's voice came from behind him, sharp with curiosity. What are you doing? He turned and held up the book and the bookmark. Hermione came closer, eyes fixed on the parchment strip. She took it gently, as if it might crumble. And that handwriting. Harry nodded. It matches the note with the chocolate. Ron appeared behind Hermione, drawn by the obvious scent of mystery and the chance to avoid homework. What's this, then? Hermione showed him. Ron squinted at the bookmark. So our secret do-gooder leaves encouraging messages in library books. He looked delighted. That's actually brilliant. It's more than brilliant, Hermione said softly. She looked at the marked passage again, her voice turning thoughtful. Look at what they chose. This isn't random. It's deliberate. It's the kind of thing someone would leave for a student who feels lonely or uncertain, or like friendship might not be enough to hold things together. Harry swallowed. He thought about the way he sometimes still flinched inside, waiting for betrayal because the Dursleys had taught him that love was conditional and kindness had a cost. He thought about how Ron and Hermione had contradicted that lesson, year after year, by simply staying. Maybe EM had noticed that too. Ron leaned closer. Should we tell Madame Pince? Hermione lifted her eyebrows. Tell her what? That someone is leaving kind bookmarks. I don't think she'd call that a crime. Harry returned the bookmark to the page carefully and slid the book back into place, leaving it exactly as he'd found it. Maybe, he said quietly, we should leave it. For the next person, Hermione's eyes flashed. Or, she said, and Harry recognized the tone, the one she got when her mind sparked into investigation mode. We could look for more. Ron groaned instinctively, but he was grinning. Oh no. Here we go. Another Hermione Granger project. This is nothing like Speedo, Hermione said with dignity, though Harry noticed her cheeks were slightly pink. This is a positive mystery. Ron spread his hands. Fine. But I'm just saying normal people would find one bookmark, go, oh, that's nice, and then go to bed. Hermione's gaze sharpened. Normal people don't live in a castle full of magical secrets, Ronald. Harry's smile deepened. He didn't disagree with Hermione. Not really. Something about this felt important, not because it was dangerous, but because it was kind. Hogwarts already took care of its students in big ways. Teachers, rules, feasts, safety charms. But this was something smaller, something human, or at least something that felt human. They split up, careful not to draw Madame Pince's suspicion. Hermione moved like she belonged between shelves, effortless, focused, her eyes scanning titles as if the spines were speaking to her. Ron wandered more randomly, but with surprising instinct, drawn toward books he actually cared about. Harry drifted between them, listening to the library's hush as if it might whisper answers. It didn't take long. Ron hissed from a nearby aisle. Oh, found one. Harry and Hermione hurried over. Ron held up a Quidditch strategy guide, open to a marked page. The bookmark bore the same initials, *EM, * the same elegant handwriting. Progress comes with patience. Keep going. Ron stared at it as if it had personally offended him by being sincere. I like it, Ron said finally, sounding slightly surprised by himself. Hermione found another in a transfiguration theory book. Understanding takes time. Don't punish yourself for learning slowly. Harry found one tucked into a volume of collected magical poetry. Beauty lives in small moments. Notice them. Each one felt like a small hand on your shoulder. Not pushing, not demanding, just reminding you to breathe. By the time Madame Pince began her pointed throat clearing, the library's version of a closing bell, they had found 7 bookmarks. 7. All with Asterisk M. Asterisk, all with messages that made Harry's chest feel warmer. They returned to their table, laying the bookmarks out carefully between them like treasure. Hermione's eyes shone with excitement. 7 different sections, different subjects, at the same pattern. Ron said slowly, leaning over them. They're all encouraging. None of them are random. And they're in books people actually borrow. Harry studied the first bookmark he'd found, the one about friendship. Whoever E.M. is, he said quietly, they know the library. They know what students read. They know what people might need. Hermione nodded. It could be a student, someone older, someone who's been here long enough to understand. Or a ghost, Ron said. Or a portrait person. Or a professor. Harry's mind drifted towards something else. Or, he said slowly, someone who used to be a student here. Hermione's expression softened. That makes sense, she murmured. Someone who found comfort in the library once and wants to leave comfort behind. Madame Pince's steps came closer. Her stare landed on them, sharp and suspicious. Hermione hastily gathered the bookmarks, as if they were contraband. They packed up and left the library before Madame Pince could decide to interrogate them. Outside, the corridor smelled faintly of pumpkins and cold stone. Torches burned bright, their flames steady despite the draught. Somewhere far away, Harry heard singing. Faint, drifting through corridors like a memory. The Hogwarts choir, perhaps, practicing for the Halloween feast. They walked back toward Gryffindor Tower, the mystery buzzing gently between them. It wasn't a frightening mystery, it was a comforting one. You know what I think? Ron said suddenly, surprising Harry. Hermione glanced at him. This should be interesting. Ron shrugged, stuffing his hands into his pockets. I think it doesn't matter who E.M. is. Hermione opened her mouth to argue, because Hermione always wanted answers. But Ron continued quickly. I mean, it matters a bit, he admitted. I'm curious. But what matters more is what they're doing. They're making people feel noticed. Like someone cares enough to leave a message. Hermione's expression softened. That's actually quite insightful. Ron blinked. I have layers. Harry smiled, and the warmth in his chest deepened. The fat lady was awake when they reached the portrait hole. She looked slightly drowsy, but pleased to have something to do. Out, late, she observed with theatrical suspicion. Up to no good? Library, Hermione said. The fat lady's expression turned almost dreamy. Libraries are good for the soul, and for hiding from the world when you need a moment's peace. Hermione gave the password. The portrait swung open, The common room greeted them with warmth and the smell of smoke and old cushions. It was quieter than usual. Most students had gone upstairs. A pair of second years played a sleepy game of exploding snap in the corner. A few seventh years studied by the fire, their faces tired but determined. Their usual corner was open, waiting. The fire crackled steadily. The stones beneath Harry's feet felt warm through his shoes, and for a moment he thought of Hermione's words. Hogwarts remembers warmth. And then Harry's eyes flicked to the small landscape portrait beside the fireplace. It had changed again. The cottage still sat in rolling winter-bound hills, but the scene had deepened into evening. The sky was darker. The snow looked thicker. The path was faintly visible in the painted light. And the cottage windows glowed warmly. Not just one window. Several. As if someone had moved through the rooms and lit lamps as they went. Harry's breath caught. "Look," he said softly. Ron and Hermione followed his gaze. The three of them stood close together, watching the portrait. In one of the windows, impossibly tiny, a figure sat by lamplight, reading. The person was only a suggestion at that scale, a shape, a quiet posture, the movement of a page turning. But it was enough to make the scene feel alive in a way that went beyond paint. Someone safe inside a cottage, someone warm, someone content with a book and a lamp and the walls around them. It's ridiculous how detailed that is, Ron whispered. Hermione's voice was softer. Portraits can be complex, even landscapes, especially if they're tied into the castle's enchantments. Harry couldn't take his eyes off the tiny reader. It felt like the library's bookmarks in a different form, a quiet encouragement, a reminder that peace existed. "That's us," Hermione whispered suddenly. Harry glanced at her. "It's not literally us," she clarified, cheeks faintly pink. "But it's what we're doing. Reading. Learning. Finding comfort. Being safe." Ron made a small, thoughtful sound. "Or maybe it's what the castle wants us to remember." Harry sat down slowly in his armchair, as if lowering himself into warmth itself. Ron dropped to the floor with a cushion. Hermione curled onto the sofa, pulling her blanket around her shoulders again. The fire snapped softly. The second year's cards popped and fizzed. The seventh years murmured over their notes. And in the portrait, the tiny reader turned another page. Hermione looked at the bookmarks they'd found, now stacked neatly on the table. "I want to do it," she said suddenly. Ron blinked. "Do what?" "Continue it," Hermione said, voice firm now. "Leave bookmarks. Kind ones. Helpful ones. Encourage people. Whoever M is. They started something good." Ron rubbed his face with his hands. "You want to sign them EM?" "No," Hermione snapped, then softened. "No, of course not. We could use our own initials. Or none at all. The point isn't credit. The point is the kindness." Harry felt something settle into place inside him, a gentle click, like a door closing against cold. "I like that," he said quietly. "It feels right." Ron sighed dramatically, but he was smiling. "Fine, but no mushy nonsense." Hermione narrowed her eyes. "Define mushy." "You know," Ron said. "Know, believe in your dreams. Sparkle. Like stardust. Rubbish. Harry huffed a laugh. Practical kindness. Hermione nodded. Exactly. They sat together for a while longer, the fire burning down into softer embers, the room growing sleepier around them. The second years eventually wandered upstairs, yawning. The seventh years packed up their notes, rubbing their eyes. One by one, Gryffindors disappeared into the dormitories, until the common room belonged mostly to shadow and firelight. Still, the three of them stayed, reluctant to break the quiet. The tiny reader in the portrait remained by lamplight, steady and peaceful. "We'll make our first bookmarks tomorrow," Hermione said, voice sleepy but determined. "We'll get good parchment. We'll think about what matters." Not too obvious, not too sappy. Just real. Ron yawned, his whole face stretching. "Fine. Real. But if I catch you writing a quote about friendship and rainbows?" Hermione swatted him with the edge of her blanket. Harry watched them, feeling the gentle pull of sleep begin to take him too. This was what Hogwarts did. It didn't just teach spells. It taught people how to care for each other without making a spectacle of it. It taught warmth. It taught attention. It taught quiet magic. Finally, Harry stood. "We should go, before we fall asleep here." Ron groaned and pushed himself up. Hermione gathered her things with careful precision, even while yawning. They climbed the stairs, calling quiet good nights. Harry's last glimpse of the common room showed the portrait cottage still glowing softly, the tiny reader still turning pages by lamplight, patient and calm. In his dormitory, Harry changed quickly and slid beneath his blankets. The window showed October's night sky, darker now, sharper, the stars clearer in the cold air. Somewhere in the castle, books have shelved themselves. Portraits whispered among frames. House elves moved silently through corridors. And in the library, 7 bookmarks waited in 7 books, ready for 7 different students to find, each message a small anchor of kindness. Harry pulled the covers close and thought of the note he'd write tomorrow. Not for attention, not for praise. Just to remind someone, a stranger he might never meet, that they mattered, that they were seen, that they belonged. And as sleep found him gentle and sure, he felt grateful for mysteries that didn't threaten, for secrets that healed, for friends who chose each other again and again, and for a castle that remembered warmth and kept sharing it, quietly, with everyone who needed it. The first frost arrived on a Tuesday morning in mid-November, and Hogwarts looked as if it had been carefully etched into a storybook overnight. Harry woke to lacework patterns spread across the dormitory window. Delicate ice crystals that curled and branched like spellwork paused mid-cast. When he leaned in close, his breath fogged the glass, and for a moment the frost seemed to shimmer, as though it enjoyed being admired. Outside, the grounds had turned silver and pale. The grass crackled beneath students' shoes as they crossed the courtyard. Along the lake's edges, a thin sheet of ice had begun to form, trapping fallen leaves in clear frozen layers, like insects caught in amber. Even the forbidden forest looked different in the sharp morning light. Not gentle, exactly, but softened, as if the frost had painted over some of its menace. Winter wasn't truly here yet. November hovered on that threshold where the world couldn't decide whether to keep letting autumn linger or to hand everything over to cold. But Hogwarts, Harry noticed, knew. The castle met the season with readiness. Torches flared brighter in corridors. Fires seemed to burn more eagerly, crackling with extra enthusiasm, as if pleased to have a real job again. Blankets in dormitories felt heavier, warmer, the kind of weight that settled you instead of trapping you. Even the bathrooms seemed less miserable, a suspicious sign that, because someone had strengthened warming charms around sinks and showers, it was the evenings, though, that belonged to November. Darkness came absurdly early now, sometimes sliding down over the windows before dinner had even ended. The night felt thick, velvety, pressing against the castle's glass like a curious creature trying to peer inside, and Hogwarts answered the dark with light. Nearly 2 weeks after the frost arrived, Harry sat in the Gryffindor common room, wrapped in a thick wool blanket Hermione had conjured the moment she noticed him shiver. She hadn't asked. She had simply flicked her wand and said, in a tone that suggested she was correcting an obvious mistake in the universe, "Honestly, Harry." Ron lay on the floor beside Harry's chair, using another blanket as a makeshift cushion, working on divination homework with the enthusiasm of someone scrubbing cauldrons during detention. "I'm meant to predict the future based on tea leaves," Ron complained, glaring at his parchment. "But all I can predict is that Trelawney will pour me tea and tell me my inner eye is blocked by skepticism." "You could try," Hermione suggested from the sofa, "actually drinking tea and reading the leaves." She was knitting as she spoke, not by hand the way Muggles did, but with enchanted needles that clicked and danced in mid-air once she set the pattern. The sight had become normal over the last few weeks, needles moving like tiny silver creatures, obedient and precise, as Hermione watched them with the half-distracted satisfaction of someone learning a new kind of magic. Ron made a face. "Or I could invent something tragic, get the same mark, and avoid drinking tea that tastes like disappointment." Harry smiled, but didn't join in. He liked listening to them. He liked the way the common room sounded at this time of night. Low conversation, the pop of fire, the occasional laugh, and the soft hush beneath it all. The sense that the castle was settling, drawing its students inward where it could keep them warm. A group of third years huddled in the corner, pretending to study Transfiguration, while actually gossiping about who was going to Hogsmeade with whom. Two sixth-year girls practiced a charm that made colored lights drift between their wands, like floating lanterns. Colin and Dennis Creevy examined photographs on a table, arguing about exposure time as if they were publishing for a magazine. It was ordinary, and that was what made it precious. Harry's gaze drifted to the small landscape portrait beside the fireplace, the one they'd started watching back in September. It had continued changing through October, shifting from summer into autumn, then deepening into late autumn with bare trees and heavy smoke from the cottage chimney. Last night, Harry had noticed the first dusting of snow on the painted hills. Tonight, as he watched, a light appeared in one of the cottage's upper windows. Then another. Then another. Like someone moving through rooms, lighting lamps as they went. "It's changing again," Harry said, quietly. Ron rolled over, instantly delighted at the excuse to stop thinking about tea leaves. "About time. I was starting to think the portrait got bored of us." Hermione set her knitting down. The needles paused mid-stitch and hovered obediently, waiting. The three of them watched as more lights bloomed behind the painted windows. The cottage looked warmer than the world around it. Smoke curled from the chimney in thick, cozy plumes. It reminded Harry, unexpectedly, of the Burrow on winter evenings, the way it looked from outside, all golden squares of light against the dark, as if the house itself glowed with the life inside it. "It's preparing for winter," Hermione murmured. "Like the castle is," Harry said. Hermione nodded, thoughtful. "Have you noticed the blankets? The warming charms? Hogwarts adjusts before we even ask." "That's house elf work," Ron said, but there was wonder in his voice even as he tried to sound casual. "They keep everything running. We never even have to think about it." Hermione's expression flickered, her old frustration about house elf rights pressing against the simpler truth that their care was real. They do, she said carefully, and that's exactly why I hate that we treat it like it's nothing. Harry watched the fire, listening to the crackle, thinking about invisible hands tending flames all over the castle. House elves moving through corridors at night, like quiet currents, smoothing and warming and repairing, making Hogwarts feel like home in ways most students never noticed. We should tell them thank you, Harry said suddenly. Ron blinked. Tell who? The house elves, Harry said. Not as a big thing, just a note, something that says, we notice. Balaam. Hermione's face brightened so quickly, it was as if someone lit a lamp behind her eyes. Yes, she said at once. Yes. That's actually, Harry, that's genuinely lovely. Ron sat up, scratching the back of his head. I mean, yeah, I suppose they do deserve it. Hermione gave him a pointed look. Suppose. Ron sighed. Fine. They deserve it. They're brilliant. And I don't want to get hexed by the laundry. Harry laughed softly, and for a moment the room felt even warmer. They fetched parchment and quills and settled around the low table near the fire. The question was, what to write? How to sound grateful without sounding like you were speaking to a child? How to acknowledge care without turning it into something awkward? Keep it simple, Hermione advised, though she herself took about 5 drafts before she was satisfied. Harry wrote first, his handwriting slower than Hermione's, but steady. Thank you for the warm blankets. Thank you for the fires that never go cold. Hogwarts feels like home because of you. Ron stared at Harry's note for a long moment, then wrote with blunt sincerity. Cheers for everything. Seriously. You lot are brilliant. Hermione finally settled on. Your care makes Hogwarts magical in ways that have nothing to do with spells. Thank you for every kindness. They placed the notes on the mantelpiece, weighed down with a few sickles. Hermione's compromise between leaving gratitude and offering something that at least resembled payment, even if the house elves might ignore it. Then they sat back and looked at the little pile of parchment, as if it mattered far more than its size, because it did. Outside the tower windows, the frost pressed close. Inside, the fire snapped and glowed. The portrait's cottage stood bright with warm windows, as though approving. Right, Ron said, stretching his arms overhead. Now that we've done our good deed, anyone fancy wizard's chess? Harry opened his mouth to answer, and stopped. On the table beside Ron, a chess set sat waiting. It hadn't been there earlier. Harry was sure of it. The board was inlaid with alternating squares of ebony and pale holly. The pieces were carved from dark wood, polished smooth by years of handling. They looked old, loved, the kind of set someone treasured. Where did that come from? Harry asked. Ron turned, frowning. What? He followed Harry's gaze, and his expression shifted to confusion. That was not there 5 minutes ago. Hermione leaned forward, careful not to touch it yet. Her eyes narrowed, scanning details, like she was reading a text. It's old, she murmured. Look at the craftsmanship. Those pieces are hand-carved. Someone took time with this. Ron reached out and picked up the White King cautiously. The piece sat heavy in his palm, surprisingly warm from the fire's heat. So, Ron said slowly, do we play, or do we assume it's cursed and run? This is Hogwarts, Harry reminded him. Random magical objects show up all the time. The singing teacups in the great hall, Ron said. That was Peeves. Hermione shook her head. This feels different. More intentional. As if the set had heard her, the pieces shifted slightly. Not moving on their own yet, just settling, like someone straightening themselves before a conversation. Ron's eyes widened with excitement. "They're enchanted," he whispered. "Properly enchanted." The White Queen, still in Ron's hand, made a tiny, regal nod. Ron grinned like he'd been handed a Christmas present early. Harry pulled his chair closer. "Want to play?" Ron stared at him as if the answer was obvious. "Do I want to play a mysterious, beautiful chess set that appeared out of nowhere in a magic castle?" "Yes, obviously." Hermione exhaled sharply, but sat down to watch. "If you both get hexed, I'm informing McGonagall it was entirely your own fault." Ron began setting up the pieces. They clicked into position with satisfying certainty. The knights tossed their heads. A rook flexed as if preparing for battle. Harry took the black pieces. The Black Knight's horse snorted quietly, as if insulted to be handled by someone who didn't yet understand its dignity. They began. At first, it seemed like normal wizard's chess, pieces moving under command, muttering, occasionally insulting each other in tiny voices. Ron played with his usual sharp focus, seeing combinations several moves ahead, willing to sacrifice a piece if it meant a better position later. But as the game progressed, Harry noticed something strange. When Ron made a particularly clever move, the white pieces reacted. The queen straightened proudly. The pawns seemed to stand taller. One rook made a tiny gesture that looked suspiciously like a salute. When Ron made a mistake, a sloppy pawn push, a moment of impatience, the entire white army went still, not dramatic, not mocking, just quiet. Like disappointment, like the gentle silence of a teacher waiting for you to notice your own error. Hermione leaned forward, eyes bright. "They're responding to skill," she said softly. Ron paused, hand hovering over a knight. "What do you mean?" "Watch," Hermione said. "They approve when you think well. They go quiet when you don't." Harry had an idea. "Try making a move you know is weak." Ron frowned. "Why would I do that?" "For science," Harry said. Ron rolled his eyes, but moved a pawn carelessly, exposing his king's flank. The reaction was immediate. The White King shook its head. Actually shook it. The queen turned slightly away, as if refusing to watch. Ron stared, shocked. Hermione's mouth twitched. Hermione's mouth twitched. "It's not rude, it's
Feedback.
God." Ron quickly took the move back. The pieces allowed it without argument, as if they understood this was a lesson, not a punishment. He made a stronger choice instead. The pawns perked up. One gave a tiny stamp of approval. Ron's face split into a grin that was half delighted and half determined. "All right," he muttered. "Fine. I'll play properly." They played again, and again. 3 games in total, and each time the pattern held. The pieces encouraged good thinking, patient strategy, careful attention. They didn't punish mistakes. They simply made them visible. By the 3rd game, Ron was sweating slightly with concentration, his mind sharp and alive. He won narrowly, and when he did, the White Queen bowed. Ron sat back breathless. "This is Incredible, he said. It's like playing against someone who wants you to get better. Hermione nodded slowly, fascination written all over her. Someone loved chess, she murmured, and they built this to teach. Harry thought immediately of EM and the bookmarks. Small kindnesses, quiet lessons, encouragement hidden in ordinary places. Should we leave it out? Harry asked quietly. For other students. Ron looked at the set with a possessive longing that was almost comical. It had appeared for him. The pieces clearly liked him, but after a moment he swallowed and nodded. Yeah, Ron said.
Yeah, we should. But maybe with a note.
So people understand they're special, so they don't just treat it like a toy. Hermione grabbed parchment. Ron dictated in a surprisingly careful tone, as if he wanted to respect whatever mind had created the set. These pieces have wisdom to share. Play with attention and respect. They placed the note beside the board. The White Queen dipped her head once, solemn and approving. Harry's chest warmed in that familiar way. The same feeling he'd had holding EM's bookmark in the library. The sense that Hogwarts wasn't just full of magic. It was full of care. By the time they stood to go upstairs, the common room had quieted. Most students had gone to bed. The fire burned lower. Outside, November's cold pressed hard against the windows. Hermione glanced at the portrait again. The cottage scene had fully settled into snow now, every window glowing bright. Fresh footprints appeared on the painted path, as if someone had just come home. November's nearly gone, Hermione said, voice soft with the weight of time. We'll be into December before we know it. Christmas, Ron said, yawning. You staying? Harry nodded. Yeah, I'm staying. Ron brightened. Same. Mum and Dad are visiting Charlie in Romania. Some dragon thing. Bill said he'd stay here with me and Ginny, keep an eye on us. I'm staying too, Hermione said. My parents are going to France, and Hogwarts at Christmas is special. The idea of the castle during the holidays, quieter, gentler, like a home settling, filled Harry with a small, steady happiness. They went to bed, and in the night, Hogwarts did what it always did. It cared. Harry woke to a warmer room than the day before. His blankets felt thicker. A hot water bottle lay at the foot of his bed, radiating gentle heat, as if someone had anticipated his cold toes. Harry stared at it for a moment, then smiled into his pillow. Snow began falling during breakfast in early December, light flakes drifting beneath the great hall's enchanted ceiling. At first, Harry thought it was just part of the ceiling's charm, a decorative flourish. But when he looked out the window later and saw the same flakes spinning in the air, he realized it was real. By mid-morning, the snowfall thickened into a proper storm, blanketing the grounds in white and muffling sound, until the world outside seemed wrapped in cotton wool. Most students left that day. The Hogwarts Express departed with its usual roar and whistle, carrying excited teenagers home to families and warmth and noisy holidays. The castle emptied in slow waves, corridors growing quieter with every trunk dragged away and every goodbye shouted. Harry loved it. He loved the way Hogwarts felt when it wasn't crowded, more intimate, more itself, like it could finally exhale. He stood at the common room window, watching snow pile against the glass. The lake had frozen solid, hidden beneath fresh white. The forbidden forest was a dark mass against all that brightness, branches heavy with accumulation. Even the Quidditch pitch had vanished, marked only by goalposts rising like skeletal fingers from drifts. Behind him, the common room glowed with firelight. Ron sprawled on the sofa, reading a book about famous chess matches with the seriousness of someone preparing for battle, though he kept glancing at the fire as if considering a nap instead. Hermione sat in her favorite armchair, knitting something that had started as a scarf, and was now threatening to become a blanket through sheer determination. They had the tower mostly to themselves. A couple of first years remained, initially homesick, but slowly cheered by the novelty of quiet corridors and extra attention from staff. One seventh year stayed too, studying for NEWTs, with the grim resolve of someone who refused to let Christmas distract them from the future. But the best corner by the fire belonged to Harry, Ron, and Hermione, like the castle had reserved it for them. "It's properly coming down," Harry observed, though it was obvious. "Hagrid said it might not stop until tomorrow," Ron replied without looking away from the flames. "He's worried about the creatures in the forest." Which is ridiculous, because I'm pretty sure they've handled snow before. Hermione's needles clicked steadily. The house elves will have strengthened the heating charms. They always do. She was right. The common room felt warmer than usual, the kind of warmth that seeped into bone and made you feel sleepy in the best possible way. Even the stones beneath Harry's feet seemed to radiate gentle heat. A soft pop sounded near the portrait hole. Dobby appeared. It was unmistakably Dobby, partly because he looked like Dobby, and partly because he was wearing an alarming number of hats stacked on his head, like a wobbly tower. He carried a tray laden with mugs, a steaming teapot, and a plate of gingerbread that smelled like cinnamon and cloves, and Christmas itself. "Dobby is thinking," Dobby said brightly, "that Harry Potter and his friends might like hot chocolate on such a snowy day." Ron sat up like someone had summoned him with a spell. "Dobby, you absolute legend." Dobby beamed so hard his whole face seemed to crinkle. "Dobby is happy to help Harry Potter." "And Harry Potter's wheezy. And Miss Granger too, of course." Hermione smiled warmly. "Thank you, Dobby. This is perfect." Dobby bowed so deeply, his nose nearly touched his knees, then vanished with another pop. The tray remained. Steam spiraled upward in delicate curls. The hot chocolate smelled rich and sweet, with a hint of cinnamon. The gingerbread looked soft, still warm from the oven. They gathered around it like it was treasure. Ron took one bite and sighed with dramatic reverence. "This is exactly what December should taste like." "We do have homework," Hermione said automatically. "We have time for homework," Ron corrected, "which means we don't have to do it now." Entirely different category. Harry cradled his mug between his hands and let the warmth spread into his fingers, up his arms, into his chest. Outside, the snow fell without hurry. Inside, the fire crackled. Hermione's needles clicked. Ron hummed tunelessly. Harry thought, not for the first time, that the Dursleys had never understood this kind of comfort. Not magic. They'd feared magic. But comfort like this, belonging like this, the simple truth of being wanted, was something they'd never offered him. The landscape portrait beside the fireplace had changed again. The cottage stood deep in snow now, drifts piled high against its walls, icicles hanging from the roof. Smoke poured from the chimney in thick, cozy plumes. Every window glowed warm. And now, a wreath hung on the door. Harry was certain it hadn't been there yesterday. "It's getting ready for Christmas," Harry murmured. Hermione looked up, thoughtful. "I've been thinking about that portrait," she admitted. I think it might be reflecting us." Ron frowned. "How can a portrait reflect us? It's a cottage." "Boulders." "The cottage shows what we need to see," Hermione said softly. "When we were settling back into term, it showed summer turning to autumn, that feeling of returning. When October came, it showed harvest and preparation. In November, when darkness got heavier, it showed lights and warmth. And now it's showing Christmas. Because that's what we're doing. We're preparing. Harry felt the truth of it settle gently in his chest. The portrait didn't just change with seasons. It changed with experience. With what the castle wanted them to notice. Ron studied the cottage, quieter now. So Hogwarts knows, he said slowly. Knows we stayed. Knows what we need. I think the whole castle knows, Hermione replied. Not in a creepy way. In a caring way. Like it remembers every student, and it adjusts. A soft hooting drew Harry's attention to the window. An owl sat on the sill outside, snow dusting its feathers, something clutched in its talons. Harry crossed the room and opened the window. Cold air rushed in, making the fire flare bright. The owl hopped inside, shook itself vigorously, sending snow everywhere, and dropped an envelope onto the table before taking off again into the storm. The envelope was addressed simply, to a friend. No name. Harry stared. Ron leaned in, eyes wide. Another one? They had been finding things like this since October. A quill that wrote smoothly appearing on Hermione's desk after hers, snapped in potions. A packet of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans appearing in Ron's dormitory with a note that said someone had noticed he always gave away the best flavors. A bookmark for Harry tucked into a textbook with a line about courage. Small kindnesses, quiet gifts, habits. This envelope felt different, heavier, formal almost. Harry opened it carefully. Inside was thick parchment, expensive quality. With elegant handwriting they recognized immediately, not identical to E.M., but similar in spirit. Clean, purposeful, warm. Dear students remaining for the holidays. Hogwarts at Christmas is special, quieter, perhaps, but no less magical. In fact, the silence allows you to hear things usually hidden beneath noise. The castle breathing, portraits gossiping, house elves singing in the kitchens. This year, those of you who have stayed may find small surprises scattered throughout your days. Not grand gestures, gentle reminders that you are noticed, valued, and home. Pay attention. The castle has much to teach those willing to listen. With warmth, a friend of Hogwarts. Harry read it twice, feeling something tighten in his throat. Ron's voice came out quieter than usual. So, it's not just E.M. Hermione's eyes shone, thoughtful and almost tender. Maybe E.M. started it, she whispered. Or maybe M was one part of something larger. A friend of Hogwarts, Ron repeated, as if tasting the words. Harry looked down at the parchment. You are noticed, valued, and home. For Harry, those words didn't land lightly. They landed deep, in places that had once felt empty. Home. The Dursleys' house had never been home. It had been a place he survived. Hogwarts was different. Hogwarts didn't just allow him to exist. Hogwarts made room for him, wanted him, kept him warm in ways that didn't ask for repayment. We should explore, Harry said suddenly. Ron's grin returned instantly. Yes, proper adventure. Hermione was already setting aside her knitting. The Great Hall, she said. They'll be decorating, and if the friend of Hogwarts left surprises, there may be something there. They bundled into their warmest robes, Harry's sleeves still a bit short, Ron's always a bit long. Hermione's perfectly fitted because Hermione refused to live in inconvenience when magic existed, and headed out. The fat lady dozed in her frame, wrapped in a painted fur stole. She opened one eye lazily as they passed. "Off exploring, are we?" she murmured. "Do be careful. The staircases get playful when they're bored." The corridor beyond Gryffindor Tower was quiet, in a way that felt almost sacred. Their footsteps echoed. Torches burned steady. Somewhere in the distance they heard faint singing, the suits of armor, perhaps, humming when no one important was around to complain. The castle felt intimate, more like a home than a school. A portrait of a medieval knight waved cheerfully as they passed. A suit of armor shifted aside just slightly to make room for them, like a polite person in a narrow hallway. Harry felt a strange affection for everything. For stone and torchlight and sleepy portraits, for the way Hogwarts seemed to notice them. They descended the grand staircase which behaved itself admirably, shifting only once and in a helpful direction. They emerged into the entrance hall. A massive Christmas tree had been erected already, at least 20 feet tall, pine scent filling the air. It wasn't decorated yet, but it stood waiting like a promise. The doors to the great hall were open. Inside, the enchanted ceiling showed the snow falling outside in perfect detail, thick flakes spiraling down against a dark sky. Moonlight glimmered where the storm allowed it through. Professor McGonagall stood near the teacher's table, directing decorations with the same precision she used in Transfiguration. Garland draped itself along the walls under her instruction. Enchanted baubles sorted themselves by color in midair, waiting to be hung. She looked up as they entered. Potter, Weasley. "Granger," she said crisply, but there was something softer beneath it. "Come to help?" Hermione stepped forward instantly. "If you'd like us to, Professor." McGonagall's mouth tightened in what might have been the beginnings of a smile. "We have fewer staff remaining this year, and the house elves are occupied with Christmas dinner preparations. Yes. Help would be appreciated." And so they did. They spent the next hour transforming the great hall. Harry discovered he had a knack for levitating decorations precisely into place without tangling Garland into knots. Ron's long arms made him excellent at reaching high branches of the tree. Hermione arranged baubles by color with terrifying efficiency, building a pattern that made the whole hall look as though it had been designed by someone with impeccable taste. Other students drifted in to help. The two Gryffindor first years arrived, cheeks pink from cold, eager to be useful. A Hufflepuff third year came shyly, then relaxed when Hermione praised their ribbon-tying charm. A Ravenclaw sixth year appeared with a critical eye and immediately improved the garland pattern with suggestions that made Hermione's eyebrows rise in impressed approval. Even a quiet Slytherin fifth year slipped in and began charming icicles to hang from the rafters. Delicate, shimmering, perfectly spaced. No one told them to. They just did it. It was companionable work, the kind that built closeness without demanding conversation. The great hall warmed with shared effort. Laughter rose sometimes, soft and surprised, as if everyone had forgotten how nice it felt to do something together, without competition. McGonagall supervised with minimal intervention, occasionally offering direction, but mostly letting them find their own rhythm. Slowly, beautifully, the hall transformed. The tree gained lights that looked like captured starlight. Garland wove into intricate patterns. Icicles threw rainbow shards across the stone when they caught torchlight. The house tables seemed brighter, as if pleased to be noticed. When they finally stepped back to look, the great hall looked like Christmas had arrived in full. McGonagall surveyed it, and for a moment her stern face softened. "Magnificent," she said, voice quiet but firm. quite magnificent. She paused, then added, almost as if the words surprised her, Hogwarts at Christmas is always special. But this year feels particularly important. Harry didn't ask why. He didn't need to. He felt it too. They left the great hall, tired but satisfied, walking back through quiet corridors while snow continued to fall outside. That was good, Ron said simply. It felt like we were taking care of the castle, Hermione agreed. The way it takes care of us. Back in the Gryffindor common room, the fire still burned. The hot chocolate was somehow still warm. Whether by magic, house elf efficiency, or Hogwarts simply being Hogwarts, Harry couldn't say. They sank into their usual places, the comfort wrapping around them like the blankets Hermione kept insisting Harry needed. The portrait's cottage sat deep in snow, windows glowing warmly, smoke rising straight into a still night. It looked like a promise. That warmth existed even in cold seasons, that light could persist against dark. Do you think we'll find more surprises? Ron asked, yawning. Probably, Harry said. But I think we already found the most important one. Ron blinked. What's that? Harry gestured around them. The fire, the softness of chairs, Hermione's quiet presence, Ron's familiar comfort, the portrait's steady glow, the snow falling harmlessly outside while the castle held them safe within stone. This, Harry said quietly, being here, together, that's the gift. Hermione smiled, and her knitting needles resumed their steady click. Ron nodded, understanding without needing more. Outside, December whispered against the windows. Inside, Hogwarts breathed warmth into every corner. And the fire burned low, but never dark. The new term returned with a strange kind of quiet. Not the quiet of empty corridors. Hogwarts was full again, packed with rushing students and flapping robes and the renewed chaos of lessons. But a different quiet that lived underneath it all, like winter itself had settled deeper into the stones. January always felt like that to Harry, a month that promised fresh starts while carrying the weight of the coldest stretch of the year. Christmas had ended. The decorations were gone. The feasts had faded into memory. The castle had returned to routine, and yet the darkness outside still arrived early. The air still bit at your nose, and everything felt suspended between what had been and what might come. On a Tuesday evening, 2 weeks into term, Harry sat in the library while rain drummed steadily against the high windows. Not snow this time. January had melted, the picture-perfect drifts into slush and grey puddles. Cold rain fell without drama, turning the grounds into a wash of colourless stone and water. The sky seemed permanently overcast, and Hogwarts looked like it had been sketched in charcoal, towers and courtyards blurred by wet air. The library smelled different in rain. Harry had noticed it every year, but never quite understood it. Something about damp parchment and leather bindings, about old paper and wood polish, about dust softened by humidity. Hermione had explained once. Something scientific, something about aging materials and moisture. But Harry liked the smell better when it stayed mysterious. It smelled like secrets. It smelled like knowledge. It smelled like a place where you could hide from the weather and the world, and even your own thoughts for a while. Ron sprawled across from him, supposedly writing an essay for Professor Binns, but mostly staring at his parchment with the empty-eyed despair of someone being asked to care about dates. Hermione sat to Harry's left, surrounded by her usual fortress of reference books, Quill moving with steady purpose as she compiled notes for their defense against the dark arts exam. The familiar arrangement felt like a ritual now. Harry attempting to concentrate, while Ron complained, and Hermione actually did the work, I've forgotten how to care about goblin rebellions, Ron announced to no one in particular. Is that worrying? Should I be alarmed by my own lack of concern? You never cared about goblin rebellions, Hermione replied without looking up. Your indifference is historically consistent. Ron sighed dramatically. That's actually reassuring. Nice to know I'm reliably unreliable. Harry smiled, but kept his attention on his own assignment, an essay about moonstone in potion making that was due tomorrow and still 2 inches short of Snape's required length. He could pad it, of course, add unnecessary description, stretch sentences until they groaned, but Snape had a gift for spotting filler, and an even greater gift for making you regret it. The rain intensified, hammering the windows harder. Somewhere deeper in the library, Madame Pince made her rounds. Tonight she was humming, which was unusual enough that Harry paused to listen. It was a tune he didn't recognize. Old, slightly melancholy, but not unpleasant. A song that sounded like candlelight and patience. Then Hermione's quill stopped mid-sentence. "Do you smell that?" she asked suddenly. Harry blinked, inhaled. At first he caught only the usual library scent, parchment and polish and the faint mustiness of ancient pages. But beneath it, warm and sweet and impossible in January rain, something else drifted through the air. It hit him so sharply, his chest tightened. Treacle tart. Not the idea of treacle tart. Not a memory. The real smell, buttery crust, warm syrup, sweetness that felt like comfort. Ron inhaled at the same moment, and his eyes widened. "Mum's stew," he said under his breath, as if afraid the smell would vanish if he spoke too loudly. Hermione inhaled again, slower, and her face softened into surprise. "Tea," she whispered. "And fresh parchment. And my dad's study. How?" They looked at each other, confused but not alarmed. This was Hogwarts. Panic was rarely efficient here. "It's coming from that section," Hermione said, pointing. "Not toward the main tables. Not toward the open shelves students usually used. Toward the rows near the restricted section. The older shelves, the quieter aisles, the place they'd wandered in October when they'd found EM's bookmarks, and the first hints of a kinder mystery living in the castle's corners. They stood without discussion and followed the scent. As they walked, the smell shifted in a strange way, not disappearing, but changing as whoever led moved closer. When Harry walked ahead, treacle tart became stronger, and beneath it came faintly cut grass, like the Burrow's yard in summer, and something softer, something he couldn't name but felt like the ghost of his mother's warmth. Not a clear memory, not something he could prove, but the kind of gentle ache that made his throat go tight anyway. When Ron took the lead, the air became Mrs. Weasley's kitchen. Stew, wood smoke, baked bread, and the comforting chaos of home. When Hermione stepped forward, the scent shifted again. Tea and ink and books, and something floral and clean that made her smile in a way Harry didn't see often. Quiet and private. "It's strongest right here," Ron said, running his hand along the spines of older volumes. Hermione pulled a book at random, a thick tome about household charms, and opened it. The scent swelled immediately. Not just one smell, but layers of them, as if the pages held a whole symphony of comfort. Hermione's eyes went bright with understanding. "It's a charm," she breathed, "an old one. Designed to make the library feel safe. A charm that smells like home," Ron said, voice oddly careful now. Harry touched the edge of the open page, feeling the paper's gentle roughness. The scent wasn't just pleasant, It was personal, accurate, like the castle had reached into each of them and found what comfort meant. Why haven't we noticed before? Harry asked. Maybe we weren't paying attention, Hermione said. Or maybe it activates at certain times. Ron frowned. Like now? Yes, Hermione said softly. January. When you've just left whatever home means to you, and the term stretches long ahead, and everyone pretends they're fine. Homesickness hits hardest now. Even for people who don't want to admit it. Ron inhaled deeply, eyes closing for a moment. It smells exactly like the burrow. Harry's chest ached. Not in pain, exactly. In recognition, the castle wasn't just offering warmth. It was offering the memory of being wanted. Madame Pince knows, Harry said. It wasn't a question. Of course she does, Hermione replied. She probably helps maintain it, but she doesn't advertise it. Some magic works better when it's discovered. Like a secret comfort you can stumble into when you need it most. They stood for a while between shelves, letting the library wrap them in warmth, while rain continued outside. Then, slowly, they returned to their table, but not empty-handed. Harry noticed they each chose a book from that charmed section, as if the comfort had become something you could carry. Ron selected a volume about famous chess matches. Hermione took a book on the history of magical libraries. Harry picked up a collection of essays about defensive magic, though he suspected he chose it as much for the feeling in his hands as for the words inside. This is why I love this place, Ron said when they sat again. Just when you think you know Hogwarts, it shows you something new, something that makes you feel cared for. The castle takes care of its students, Hermione agreed. We've been learning that all year, haven't we? Harry thought about it. The portrait that changed with the seasons like a quiet teacher. The enchanted chess set that encouraged careful thought and patience. The bookmarks, the anonymous notes, the gifts that appeared at the exact right moment. And now this, a section of the library that smelled like comfort itself. Someone designed all of this, Harry said quietly. Not just the big things, lessons and rules, but these smaller magics, these gentle touches. The founders, Hermione suggested, or generations of staff. Magic accumulates. Every spell cast with good intention leaves a trace. Over centuries, those traces become woven. Ron snorted. So Hogwarts is basically made of people caring. Hermione's mouth softened into a smile. Yes. Actually, that's not a bad way to put it. Ah! They worked after that in companionable quiet. Harry found his essay flowed more easily. Ron, miraculously, wrote 2 full paragraphs about goblin rebellions without dramatic suffering. Hermione took notes with the calm satisfaction of someone who believed knowledge could solve most things, and perhaps it could. As the evening deepened, the rain eased. Other students came and went. Madame Pince patrolled as always, stern as a hawk. But when she passed their table, Harry caught the briefest hint of a smile. She knew what they'd found. She approved. Later, as they packed up, Hermione said softly, "We should tell people." Ron blinked. "Tell them what? That the library smells like Mum?" Hermione elbowed him lightly. "Not like that. But if we notice someone struggling, someone missing home or feeling lonely, we can point them gently in the right direction. Let them discover it without being announced." "Like the friend of Hogwarts?" Ron said, understanding instantly. Harry nodded. It felt right. Not big gestures, small helps. Quiet kindness. They left the library and walked back through cool corridors where the torches flickered and the castle breathed in its nighttime rhythm. By the time they reached Gryffindor Tower, the rain had stopped completely. The world outside looked washed clean, still and wet and quiet. The fat lady greeted them with drowsy approval. Ah. Back from the library. Excellent. Nothing like books to settle the mind. Inside the common room, the fire crackled brightly. Students scattered across chairs and tables. Quills scratched. Laughter burst and faded. A plate of biscuits sat on the mantelpiece, slowly diminishing as people wandered past. Their corner was occupied by two fifth-year girls, but when they saw Harry, Ron, and Hermione, they gathered their things quickly. "Sorry," one said. "We know this is sort of your spot." "It's fine," Harry said, surprised. "You don't have to move." The other girl hesitated, then smiled in a way that made Harry go still. "We don't mind," she said. "You three always look like you belong here. It's nice to see." Then they left before Harry could think of anything to say. Ron flopped down, looking amused and baffled at once. Hermione looked thoughtful. Harry felt something warm settle in his chest. They sat in their usual positions. Harry in his favorite armchair, Ron on the floor with cushions, Hermione on the sofa with a blanket. The portrait beside the fireplace showed its cottage in deep winter stillness. Frost on painted windows, smoke rising steady, warm light in every room. Hermione began knitting again, needles clicking softly. "I've been thinking," she said, voice calm, "about what makes a place feel like home." "Food," Ron said instantly. Hermione smiled without looking at him. "Beyond food." Ron looked offended. "Food is foundational." "Beyond food," Hermione repeated patiently. "I think it's recognition. Being seen. Hogwarts sees us. Through portraits. Through charms. Through teachers who notice when we're struggling. Through house elves who make sure the blankets are thicker before we even realize we're cold. And we see it back," Harry said quietly. "We notice the care. We appreciate it." Hermione nodded. "Exactly. Home isn't just a place that shelters you. It's a place that knows you, and that you choose to know in return." Ron reached for a biscuit. "Deep thoughts for a Tuesday night." "January thoughts," Hermione corrected. They sat in a quiet that wasn't empty. It was full of warmth and firelight, and the sense that the castle itself was listening. Harry's gaze drifted to the portrait again. The cottage door, which had been closed a moment ago, now stood open. A tiny painted figure appeared in the doorway, not leaving, just standing there, looking out at the winter landscape, observing, taking in the quiet. "It's changing," Harry murmured. Ron and Hermione leaned in. The figure stood for a long moment, then stepped back inside. The door closed. The cottage returned to stillness. Hermione's voice came out like a whisper.
It's us.
She said, looking out at the world and choosing to come back. Harry swallowed. Something about that open door, that brief image of a person pausing then returning to warmth, felt like a lesson written in paint. They went to bed eventually. Harry lay in the dark with blankets that were exactly the right weight, exactly the right warmth. He thought about the library's scent charm and realized something quietly important. The castle wasn't reminding him of home because he was far from it. It was reminding him because Hogwarts was home now. And the real magic wasn't dramatic spells or battles. It was care. February arrived with a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. The air was still cold, Frost still crusted the ground in the mornings. Breath still fogged in corridors if you talked too long near a window. But the castle felt connected, as if winter's deepest cold made people draw closer together, seeking warmth not just from fire, but from each other. The Gryffindor common room became a gathering place in a way it hadn't been earlier in the year. Study groups formed naturally around the hearth. Younger students started asking older ones for help, without fear of being mocked. Even seventh years loosened their claim on the best chairs, shifting aside when someone looked tired. One Friday evening, Harry sat in his usual chair. But tonight it wasn't just him, Ron, and Hermione. Neville joined them, working through herbology notes, while Hermione helped with calm patience. Dean and Seamus occupied the floor nearby, arguing cheerfully about Quidditch and whether the cannons had any chance at improvement. Lavender and Parvati sat together, inventing divination predictions and giggling at their own dramatic tragedy. The fire burned bright. Or maybe it only seemed brighter because so many people were clustered near it, robes touching, elbows bumping, laughter rising like warmth itself. I still don't understand how you keep your notes organized, Neville said to Hermione, sounding less timid than Harry remembered. Mine are all over the place. Color coding, Hermione said, and began sketching a system on spare parchment. Green for plant properties, blue for care instructions, red for dangers. Neville watched with intense focus, like she was showing him a rare magical creature. Ron caught Harry's eye and smiled, proud of Hermione in that quiet way Ron had when he couldn't quite say it out loud. "Oi, Harry!" Seamus called. "Settle this. Are the cannons hopeless, or is Dean being dramatic?" "They're hopeless," Harry said immediately, and grinned as Ron made an outraged noise. "But that doesn't mean you can't support them." Dean pressed a hand to his heart. Loyalty in the face of certain defeat. Or stupidity, Ron muttered, but he was smiling. More people drifted in. Ginny appeared, bright-eyed, and perched comfortably on the arm of Harry's chair like it belonged to her. Because it did. Colin Creevey hovered nearby, camera clutched like a comfort object rather than a tool. A nervous third year joined, then relaxed when Dean immediately included him in conversation. It wasn't planned. That was what made it special. It was simply people making room. Harry's eyes flicked to the portrait beside the fire. The cottage was different tonight. The windows still glowed, smoke still rose, but the door stood open, and inside, tiny painted figures gathered, not alone, together. Harry's breath caught. "Look," he said quietly. Ron and Hermione followed his gaze. Hermione's expression softened instantly. "It's reflecting us again," she whispered. Ron leaned back, studying the cottage scene. "The castle likes this," he said. "You can feel it." Harry could. The atmosphere had a hum tonight. Subtle but real. Like Hogwarts itself was pleased. Leaning in, watching students choose warmth over isolation. The evening flowed. Someone produced exploding snap cards. Someone conjured extra cushions for the floor. Lavender shared sugar quills. Someone ran to the kitchens and returned with hot chocolate and biscuits so warm they felt like the fire had baked them. Ginny nudged Harry with her elbow at one point and said softly, "You're different this year." Harry glanced at her. "Different how?" "More relaxed," she said. "Like you finally realized you're allowed to just exist without everything being a crisis." Harry considered that. Maybe it was true. Maybe Hogwarts had taught him, slowly, through 100 small moments, that safety could be gentle, that peace didn't have to be earned through struggle. That home could be something you were allowed to have. Colin, surprisingly, asked a quiet question during a lull. "How do you know when you've found your people?" Like really found them? Harry thought carefully before he answered. I think, he said slowly, it's when being together feels easier than being apart, when you can be quiet and it's not awkward. When you trust, they'll make space for you, without you having to fight for it. Colin nodded, eyes thoughtful. Like this, he said. Yeah, Harry agreed. Exactly like this. They stayed until yawns became contagious, and even the most energetic storytellers ran out of stories. As people drifted toward dormitories, someone said, "Same time next week?" And the answer came from multiple voices without hesitation. Yes. Next Friday, same fire. Same willingness to gather, same quiet agreement that being together mattered. That night, as Harry climbed the stairs with Ron and Neville, he looked out the window at stars scattered across the February sky, cold and distant, but steady. Hogwarts held its students close, and the fire in the common room burned low, but never dark. The first hint of spring arrived in early March. Harry noticed it at breakfast, the way sunlight slanted through the great hall windows at a slightly warmer angle, less sharp than winter light, more golden. The enchanted ceiling showed clouds that looked softer, less like steel and more like cotton. Outside, frost retreated to shadowed corners. Patches of grass reappeared. Professor Sprout mentioned the first shoots in the greenhouses. Hagrid was seen near the forest's edge, looking for signs of new growth, like a man who believed in hope as a practical thing. Winter wasn't finished. March could still bite, could still surprise you with cold, but its grip had loosened, and Hogwarts felt it. The castle seemed to breathe differently, as if waking from a long, careful sleep. On the last Friday before the Easter holidays, the gathering in the common room happened like it always did now. It wasn't an event anymore. It was a tradition. Students collected around the fire with homework or games or just themselves. They brought laughter, tiredness, small stories from their week. They made room without being asked. Harry sat in his chair, but the chair wasn't just his anymore. It had become part of the map of this ritual, a landmark, a point in the constellation. Ron sprawled on the floor with a chess set, teaching a second year the finer points of knight positioning with the seriousness of a professor. Hermione helped Neville prepare for herbology practical, while also correcting Ginny's transfiguration essay with ruthless tenderness. Dean and Seamus sat near the fire sketching something that involved a lot of debate about dragon anatomy. Someone else practiced a charm that made tiny paper birds flutter and settle like living origami. Harry looked at the portrait beside the fire. The cottage had changed again. Snow had melted into damp earth. The door still stood open. It had stayed open since February, as if the painting had decided that invitation mattered more than weather. And now, the painted figures had stepped outside. They worked in what looked like a garden, preparing soil, turning earth, making space for planting. It's getting ready for spring, Hermione murmured. Which means exams. Ron groaned from the floor. It means both, Hermione said patiently. You can have sunshine and exams. Ron looked betrayed. That feels illegal. Harry smiled, but his attention drifted into a thought that had been forming all year, accumulating like snowflakes until it became something solid. September's settling in, October's mysteries, November's warmth against darkness, December's quiet care, January's scent of home, February's community. Now March, showing them hope in small green hints. Hermione glanced up. Harry, she said gently, you've gone quiet. He looked around and realized more faces had turned toward him than he expected. Not just Ron and Hermione, but Neville, Ginny, The second year, even Dean and Seamus, there was no pressure in their attention. Just care. Just thinking, Harry said. About what? Ron asked, but without teasing. Harry took a breath and tried to say what felt enormous and simple at the same time. I think, he said slowly, I finally understand what the castle has been teaching us. Hermione's eyes widened slightly, already listening like this was important. Harry gestured toward the portrait. The cottage door open. The figures gardening. That cottage, he said. It's been showing us what home looks like. The room grew quieter. Not a perfect place, Harry continued. Not somewhere without cold or darkness, but somewhere that changes with you. Somewhere that makes room for you. Somewhere you choose to return to again and again. Ron's expression softened, and that alone was proof Harry was saying something real. Hogwarts has been doing that all year, Harry said. The fires that never go out. The library that smells like comfort. The chess set that teaches without punishing. The bookmarks. The notes. The way the castle adjusts before we even ask. The kindness, Hermione whispered. And we've been doing it too. Neville said suddenly, voice stronger than Harry had ever heard it. We've been making room. Helping each other. Showing up. Harry looked at Neville and felt something in his chest settle into place. Yes, Harry said. Exactly. Ginny's eyes shone, but she smiled. The burrow is home, she said softly. But Hogwarts is home too. Ron swallowed, then said quietly, for some of us, Hogwarts is the first place that ever really felt like it. Harry didn't look at Ron when he said that. He didn't have to. The words wrapped around Harry like a blanket anyway. The fire crackled, sparks lifting like tiny approving stars. Harry glanced at the portrait again and noticed a detail he was sure hadn't been there before. Flowers, tiny painted blooms near the cottage doorway. Brave little colors against damp earth. Life insisting. Beauty persisting. Hope, not loud, but steady. I want to remember this, Harry said suddenly. All of it. The whole year. Every small discovery. We could write it down, Hermione said at once. Not just events. Feelings. Lessons. A record. Ron shrugged, kinder than his tone suggested. Or we could just live it. Let it stay real, not trapped on paper. Both, Harry decided. We remember because we paid attention, because we lived it fully. Bethrism Dean, who had been sketching quietly, held up his parchment. Harry realized Dean had drawn the common room as it looked right now. The fire, the cluster of students, the portrait in the background, the sense of warmth. A moment preserved not through magic, but through care. Can I have a copy? Harry asked. Dean looked surprised, then pleased. Yeah, he said. Of course. The gathering continued. People came and went. The fire burned steady. Hogwarts held them all, quietly pleased with what it saw. As the night deepened, the painted figures in the portrait finished their gardening and began to head back inside the cottage. Their work completed for now. The door remained open. Always open. An invitation. A promise. A reminder that home welcomed you back. I'm glad we stayed, Harry said quietly, thinking back to December. Glad we were here to see all of this. Best decision all year, Ron said.
One of many.
Hermione corrected. But she was smiling. Eventually the common room emptied. The second year went to bed with new chess strategies. Dean and Seamus promised to show their dragon sketch to Hagrid. Ginny hugged Hermione quickly and disappeared upstairs. At last it was just the three of them again. Harry, Ron, Hermione. Firelight, the portrait's open door. The castle breathing around them like something living. Same time next week? Ron asked, though it wasn't really a question anymore. Always, Harry said. They climbed to their dormitories, footsteps soft on worn stone. At the landing, Hermione paused. Thank you, she said quietly, for paying attention with me this year, for understanding that small things matter. Harry looked at her, then at Ron, then back. Thank you, he said, and meant it in every direction, to friends, to castle, to the quiet magic that had carried him. In his dormitory, Harry slipped into bed under blankets that were exactly right. Outside, stars glimmered above the grounds. The lake rippled gently, freed from ice. The forest stood dark but less forbidding, as if spring softened even its edges. Harry thought about the year's lesson, the one Hogwarts had been teaching in hundreds of small ways. Home wasn't a destination. It was a practice, a choice, 1,000 small magics woven together, attention, care, room made at the fire, the decision to return, again and again, to warmth. Somewhere below, in the common room, the fire burned low, but never dark, and, in the portrait beside it, the cottage stood with its door open, garden prepared, smoke rising steady into a softening sky. Hogwarts remembered warmth. Hogwarts held it close. And Harry, finally, knew he belonged inside that warmth, not only receiving it, but helping to make it real for others, too.